Hey, long time no see. You've really aged, hum. We're divorced, you know. You could at least try to be a bit more considerate in how you speak. Plus, we're exes, so I thought I could speak freely. What have you been up to since we split? Right after our divorce, I got remarried, you know. And guess what? My wife was pregnant right after the wedding. It seems she was already pregnant when we divorced. It turns out, if you're not infertile, having kids is easy. Now I'm living happily with my wife and son. I see. Looks good for you, being so happy. And how about you? Oh, sorry. With your infertility, you'll be alone forever, right? Past 30 and unable to have kids. No one's going to want you, right? I divorced my ex-husband 50 years ago due to infertility. At class reunion, I met my ex-husband, who boasted about his family. However, it seems he's greatly mistaken. Mistaken about what? Now, I'll make sure he knows so he won't misunderstand. I'm sure he'll be frustrated to hear it. Also, while I'm at it, I'll add a little extra information. Plus, with a bit of mischief, I decided to tell Derek something I didn't have to. That my words beyond my imagination drove him crazy. I'm Amy, 28 years old, and working for a consulting firm. I'm about to get married soon and will be meeting my parents shortly. My soon-to-be husband Derek is 28 and a salesman at a major manufacturer. We've been childhood friends since kindergarten through middle school. We went to different high schools, and after graduating from university, I left my hometown to start my job. Years later, we reconnected through social media and realized we worked nearby. I met Derek again for the first time since middle school. Reuniting with a childhood friend as adults away from our hometown, we fell in love right away and eventually decided to marry. Do you think it'll be okay? I'm worried your dad might not like me. Don't worry so much. It'll be fine. But your dad is a company president, right? When we were kids, I didn't think much of it and just called him uncle. But now that I work, it's natural to feel nervous, isn't it? My husband kept adjusting his perfectly straight tie and wiping the sweat from his brow with a handkerchief. He was being tense, and I felt nervous just watching him. Indeed, my father owns a metalworking company, but it's a small to mid-sized business in a rural area. Though it used to be quite a large company, Company has significantly downsized now, and my father isn't exactly a dignified figure. If you're okay with a daughter like her, you can take her. But remember, no returns. My father's easygoing nature eased my husband's tension within a minute. I won't be returning her. In fact, even if you ask for Amy back, I won't give her up. By the end, my husband was relaxed enough to joke around. My mother and I exchanged glances, sharing a "well, it's over with" look. At least that meant the introduction went well, so my husband could relax. But on the ride home, he looked a bit troubled. After hearing about the factory and the company today, it seems your father's business isn't doing too well, is it? It's not as good as it used to be. Well, that's just the way things go with time. But you're a management consultant, right? can't you do something? Do you know how hard it is to turn a company around? I have my own job, and it's not like I can help my dad's business on the side. If I were to do it, I'd have to quit my current job and join his company. I see. You're an only child, so you're planning to quit your job eventually and take over the family business, right? That's not going to happen. My dad doesn't want me to inherit the company and struggle. He plans to sell it in the future. That's why I'm only giving him simple advice to keep the company going until he retires. Realizing there's no need to worry about my father's company, my husband's expression softened. I felt happy that he cared about my father, and my expression softened too. Half a year later, we got married. I'll have a coffee. Do you want your usual tea? Amy? Yes, thank you. While I was cleaning up the dinner dishes, my husband brewed my tea. He timed it so the tea wouldn't get cold, waiting until I finished with the dishes. Being a salesman, he's very attentive. Let me saying anything, he anticipates what I need and does it first. I have no complaints about that, and our married life is going smoothly. However, 2 years into our marriage, although I had no complaints about our life, I started feeling anxious. Our relationship was good, and we were intimate with each other. But 2 years into the marriage, we still hadn't been blessed with a child. There's no need to rush. It will happen in time. But I'm already 30. I can't help but feel a bit anxious. My husband, lounging on the living room sofa and fiddling with his smartphone, responded lightly to my concerns. Normally, I might have expected him to listen more seriously. However, I know he's intentionally keeping it casual, so I don't feel too anxious or responsible about not being able to get pregnant. Derek is an only child too, and his parents both worked. He often spent time alone at home and has a strong longing for a family life. Both of my parents worked as well, but I used to go to my parents' office after school, so I never felt lonely like he did, always having my parents and their employees around. But I understand the importance of spending time with people. Therefore, I want to make my husband's wish come true. I also want a child. Just to be sure, I'll go to the hospital and get checked. Do you really need to do that? If there's nothing wrong, then that's great. But if there is, it's better to know the cause, right? Well, that might be true, but the next weekend, I went to the hospital alone. There were 2 reasons for this. First, I thought that even if I got checked, they would probably say there's nothing wrong. The second reason was that if there was a problem, I didn't know how to react if my husband was there with me. Without thinking too deeply, I went to the hospital, waiting for my name to be called while thinking about what to buy on the way back. The examination was quick, but the results would come later, so I went home for the day. 2 weeks later, I was given the results. Why does it seem like bad news always takes precedence in these situations? After hearing the results, I didn't go shopping as planned and walked home staring at the ground. It turns out I'm infertile. I see. The night I received the results, I told my husband about my infertility. I chose to tell him during dinner, hoping it would somehow ease the mood, but the atmosphere at home became tense, and both of us stopped eating. However, not everything was hopeless. There was still some chance. The doctor said that my infertility could be treated with about a 30% success rate. Success rate decreases as you get older, especially after 30. It seems I just made it in time. 30 Hugh. And that rate will decrease from now on. Well, I started to eat again. My husband's fork remained still. It seems there is a difference in perception between my husband and me regarding the 30 figure. When I was told I was infertile, I despaired, thinking I couldn't have children. However, hearing the 30 chance, I felt relieved considering it a not-so-low number. But to my husband, 30 didn't seem like a high probability. Seeing his disappointed expression, I stopped eating again. Since that day, our once smooth marital life has become somewhat awkward. Will you be home late tomorrow too? Yeah. As I cleared the dishes, I spoke to my husband relaxing in the living room, but he replied disinterestedly. Ever since he learned about my infertility, he has been coming home late. He says he's busy with work, but I suspect he wants to reduce the time he spends at home. As a result, on weekends, he leaves early in the morning and returns late at night. But with his late returns, I started eating dinner alone. Moreover, he stopped sleeping in the bedroom and started sleeping on the living room sofa. Thus we lived together, but it seemed like we were living separately. I felt lonely as I sensed my husband drifting away, but knowing the cause lies with me. I couldn't blame him. 6 months later, our relationship had completely cooled down, and we hardly spoke at home. Today, being a weekend, he left the house early. Watching him put on his shoes at the entrance, I felt a sense of relief. I felt later after he left, and found myself more efficient with the laundry. But as I was about to put his shirt in the washing machine, I sighed. I thought, again with the foundation? It's so hard to remove. His shirt had foundation stains, but I wasn't surprised. It has been happening occasionally for the past 2 or 3 months, since our relationship had already cooled off. I had no intention of making a fuss about a possible affair. I spread out the shirt stained with foundation and resigned myself to the fact that our marriage was probably reaching its end. He must be thinking the same thing. That's probably why he doesn't bother hiding his infidelity, casually leaving shirts stained with foundation in the laundry basket. That night, I broached the topic of divorce. Should we end this? If we divorce, you can be with your new woman, right? So, you knew. Let's skip the pretense. I won't ask for a property division over the affair, so can we part ways smoothly? Okay. I have a job, so I don't need the money. Plus, as he works for a major manufacturer, the property division wouldn't hurt him much. So a hassle-free divorce is preferable to me. Ike accepted the divorce without batting an eye, as if he anticipated it. Though I wasn't asking for a property division, I did want to know a bit about his affair partner. This was just my curiosity. What's she like? Your partner? She's 2 years younger. We met through our shared interest in fishing. Ah, so that's where you've been going on weekends. She's bold to date a married man. You didn't hide your marriage, did you? No, I was honest. I told her we were divorcing and that our relationship was with the intent to remarry. Now, I'm just waiting on her. Waiting. Don't tell me she's married. No, she's single. I succeeded in a love conquest. I had a lot to say after hearing his story, but saying too much could jeopardize the smooth progression of our divorce, so I swallowed my words. The divorce went through without any issues. He quickly moved on to his new partner, who apparently had also left her boyfriend. I thought I'd be fine with a divorce, having prepared for it, but the reality hit me harder than expected. After staying in the house and continuing to work for a while, I eventually quit my job and returned to my parents' home. 15 years later, back at my parents' home, I fully recovered from the divorce. It's almost a distant memory now. Then I received an invitation to a middle school reunion. Derek, also a childhood friend, might be there. Bring the divorce. I prioritized a smooth separation, so I didn't say everything I wanted to. I didn't ask for property division over the affair, but that didn't mean I wasn't angry. I decided to attend the reunion, thinking of getting a little back at him after 15 years, but my small act of revenge would drastically affect his life. When I arrived, I was greeted by many familiar faces. Catching up with old friends, we reminisced about the past. While enjoying the conversation, I saw him approaching me. Hey, long time no see. You aged, huh? Derek greeted me with a laugh and a rude comment. If I'm old, then so is he, right? We were enjoying the conversation until he approached with a villainous grin, making the others feel awkward. We're divorced, remember? I'd be more considerate. We're exes, so I thought I could speak freely. What have you been up to since our divorce? I got remarried right after ours, you know? And my wife was pregnant immediately. Turns out, if you're not infertile, it's easy to have kids. Now I'm living happily with my wife and son. I see. Good for you being so happy. How about you? Oh, sorry. Being infertile, you must be alone for life, right? No one wants someone over 30 who can't have kids, right? Huh? Who's alone? Derek then started showing photos of his family outings on his phone and bragging about his new wife and son, trying to assert his happiness over mine. I listened to Derek's boring stories with a blank expression. He seems to be under several misconceptions. Just correcting those will surely make him feel regretful. Access treatment as I was thinking about how to address his misunderstandings. My daughter Jane approached me at the perfect moment. Mommy, I made a new friend. That's great, sweetie. Mommy is talking to this man right now, so can you play with your new friend a little longer? She obediently ran off, full of energy. Hey, who was that girl? Oh, she's my daughter. Didn't you know kids were allowed today? Look, there are other kids here too. No, I mean, didn't she just call you mommy? Yes, that's my daughter. 10 expectancies this year, but you are infertile, right? How do you have a child? I see. She's your stepchild from a new marriage, right? How rude. Jane is my biological daughter. Infertile, but you have a child? How? I told you infertility can be treated. You just assumed it was incurable? Just around us, soft laughter could be heard. I had shared with close friends about my divorce and having a child, so Derek, who assumed I couldn't have children and was flaunting his own, became the butt of the joke. He realized he was being laughed at. So you have a child, which means you got married again. Congratulations. Derek, embarrassed by his failed attempt to show off, was red-faced. His congratulatory words seemed more like an attempt to save his face. Who'd marry an old lady like you? It's called workplace romance. Really? Still working at the consulting firm? Oh, you don't know. I took over my father's company. Now I'm the president. Dad hasn't retired yet. He's the chairman. What? I thought that company was going to be sold. After the divorce, I returned home and decided to take over the family business. In these 15 years, it was tough, but now our annual revenue is close to $30 million. We've moved from a small to medium-sized business to a major one. The $30 million. Up to my successful turnaround of my father's company was well known among local friends. Derek, unaware of this, was laughed at again. You said turning a company around wasn't easy. That wasn't, but after the divorce and quitting my job, I could fully dedicate myself to it. Surviving my father's company was a continuous struggle. Actually, many employees had a negative impression of me suddenly returning to take over. So I first focused on building trust through active communication with employees. It took 2 years just to achieve that. Once I earned their trust, I leveraged my consulting experience to prove my business acumen. It took about 3 years for this phase. During this time, I worked so hard that I wore myself out, both physically and mentally, but my current husband was there to support me. He also stood by me through the infertility treatments, and 10 years ago we were blessed with our daughter Jane. But even after her birth for 10 years, we all worked tirelessly. Before I knew it, the company broke through the common business barrier of $10 million in annual revenue and is now growing towards $30 million. You are the president of a company with $30 million in revenue. Yes. You left me because of my infertility and went to another woman, not knowing that I had the potential. I had the potential to become the president of a company with $30 million in revenue, but I was able to have a child. How do you feel now? And how about you? How's work? Have you become a sales manager or something? I asked Derek with a villainous smile, not knowing his current status at the company. In a major manufacturing company like his, there must be a lot of competition. Seeing him clench his teeth in silence, I was convinced he hadn't made significant progress in his career. I successfully countered his attempt to gloat over his children and took the upper hand with my career success. Seeing his frustrated expression, I felt satisfied, but decided to drop one more bomb. By the way, you said your wife got pregnant immediately after your marriage, which was right after our divorce. But she also left her boyfriend around the same time, right? Does that really mean that it's my child? Of course it is. There's no mistake about it. That doesn't sound very convincing. You know, you were having an affair and she was cheating too, right? That the topics of affairs, cheating, and the possibility that Derek's child might belong to someone else drew the attention to those around us. Not just our close friends, but many others gathered around us. Though it was a bit embarrassing to be the center of attention. Derek was clearly the villain in this situation. But all the cold stares were focused on him. Derek, realizing the cold stares were directed at him, fled the venue as if he was escaping. Satisfied with making him embarrassed, I resumed chatting with my friends, feeling like I had gotten my revenge on him. I thought I wouldn't have to think about Derek anymore. However, after a month after the reunion, he called me, probably getting my number from a friend at the event. Acted reluctantly, I answered the phone. Hey, did you know about this? Action of ran for what he could be referring to, but came up blank and asked him directly. What are you talking about all of a sudden? What's going on? It's about my child. Just like you said, it turns out he's not actually my child. What? I couldn't help but burst into laughter, even though I knew I shouldn't. Apparently Derek had a DNA test done, worried by my words, and it turned out that the child he thought was his with his new wife was not biologically related to him. How did you know that? Why didn't you tell me? I didn't know. I just said that to make you uneasy, or maybe cause a little argument with your wife. I never thought it would actually be true. Was she a crazy woman? No, she thought it was my child too. She didn't know until I told her. She had a boyfriend until right before getting pregnant with you, and you both never questioned it. I questioned it. It's on you two, but you've raised him for 50 years. Even if he's not biologically yours, he's still your son, right? What? No way. I was deceived into raising someone else's child for 15 years. It's definitely going to be a divorce. I had a lot to say to Derek, just like during our divorce discussion. But everyone has their own values, and it's not my place to interfere in someone else's family matters. So you're going to divorce her? That's the problem. I can't because she won't agree to it. Apparently, upon discovering the child wasn't his, Derek wanted to divorce his now wife. She, however, first tried to contact her boyfriend from 15 years ago, probably to see if she could rely on him after a divorce. But after telling him about the child, he disappeared, quitting his job and becoming unreachable. Can't you divorce her because she had another man's child? Or isn't that grounds for divorce? That's where it gets complicated. The child was conceived before our marriage, so it's not technically infidelity. We both thought he was ours. It seems the situation between Derek and his new wife is more confusing than I imagined. He explained it in detail, but it was a legal matter that I didn't fully grasp. What I understood was that legally, Derek is recognized as the father since they both believed the child was theirs. To push through with the divorce, he would need to legally prove he's not the father and nullify their parental relationship. However, there was a case where the Supreme Court ruled that a DNA test couldn't negate a father-child relationship, making his situation quite complicated. Even if the parent-child relationship is legally dissolved, it's not entirely the wife's fault, as both she and Derek believed it was their child, and neither had investigated the father's identity. Since it wasn't a deliberate deception on her part, a divorce on the grounds of the child's paternity may not be granted. So the new wife, having nowhere else to turn after the real father disappeared, refuses to divorce Derek. He wants to divorce, but can't use the child's paternity as a reason. That's the situation. So you want a divorce but can't, right? Exactly. What should I do? To continue raising someone else's child? I sighed upon hearing Derek's dilemma. You keep saying someone else's child, but he's been your son, hasn't he? Oh, he's the child of my wife's ex, not mine. I tried to reason with him, but it seemed futile. I have nothing more to say to you. It was your decision to divorce me over my supposed infertility, to take your new wife from her boyfriend, and not to check who the child's real father was. Well, own up to your decisions. I hung up on him in anger. What a pathetic ex-husband, crying to his ex-wife from 15 years ago. Returning home from work, I found my husband and daughter happily watching TV in the living room. Watching them, I felt glad I had divorced Derek. Apparently, Derek couldn't divorce and moved out, so now they're living separately. If the separation lasts 3-5 years, it could become grounds for divorce. However, until then, he must pay living expenses and child support for his wife and son. His son is 15, so even if the divorce happens in 3 years, he will be an adult. His wife likely won't drag out the divorce process then. Also, his son doesn't know the truth yet about his biological father and resents Derek for leaving. Learning the truth might either alleviate this resentment or it won't. I hope Derek faces his son's anger without running away. At Haitians by then, he will have experienced a second divorce and probably be done with marriage. So my ex-husband, who tried to gloat over me for being childless, ended up having his life turn upside down by a casual statement I made. He should have refrained from trying to one-up me. I continue to work hard, and unlike Derek, our family relations are strong. We are currently planning our next family outing, my daughter's wedding. That's none of my business. On that day, I've already promised to travel with my adorable niece. We finally got the room we wanted, and prioritizing travel is just common sense, right? But of my daughter's fiancé came to greet us. My husband canceled at the last minute in response to a call from his niece. He was adamant about the wedding date, proclaiming he had made plans with his niece before the wedding date was even set, and wouldn't budge. He reasoned that his niece was affectionate towards him. but his daughter was not. However, my husband's fondness for his niece was not a new development. His affection had merely shifted from his sister-in-law to his niece. I strongly asked my husband if he was sure he wouldn't regret his decision. It's more painful for me to prioritize my daughter and be disliked by my niece. I'm certain I'd regret that more. With such a stance, there was nothing I could do. My daughter didn't object to her father's decision, so I concluded that any further persuasion would be a waste of time. And then on the day of the wedding, an unexpected turn of events occurred thanks to my brother-in-law's quick thinking. As a result, my husband came to know a terrible truth, turning pale as he faced the ruin of his life. I'm in my mid-50s, having been married for 28 years. My husband is also of the same generation, and we met at a dinner party with mutual friends. When I was in my 20s, it was a time when women were stereotyped as finding happiness in getting married, having children, and raising them. I refused all arranged marriage proposals from my parents, insisting that if I were to marry, it would only be for love. However, as I passed 25, it became harder to avoid these proposals, and after discussing it with a friend, I was introduced to my future husband. Asked if I felt romantic love for him. Looking back, it doesn't seem like I did. I just didn't want it to be controlled by my parents and marry a man of their choosing. It felt more like a compromise and a spur-of-the-moment decision. I suspect my husband felt the same. I wanted to continue working after marriage, so I insisted that it would be okay as long as he didn't have the outdated belief that women should stay at home. My husband encouraged me, saying that women's social advancement would become the norm. And I saw him as an understanding person who could build a happy home with me. Our marriage progressed smoothly, and we got married within about half a year of meeting and started our married life. My husband agreed with my desire to have children young and return to work, and I got pregnant within a year of our marriage, giving birth to our daughter. After that, I was busy with childcare, housework, and work. When my daughter became an adult, I cried unabashedly in front of her, feeling that the hardships were all part of our happiness. This might sound like a happy family, but there was a hidden problem with my husband that wasn't easy to share. After our marriage, he began to show his true nature. Firstly, we split all living expenses equally. We signed an agreement that we wouldn't ask about each other's salary amounts. The agreement also stated that we wouldn't pry into how the other spent their salary after deducting living expenses. Just behind these actions was the presence of my sister-in-law. My husband, who had an ordinary appearance, was in stark contrast to my sister-in-law, who had a beautiful face. It was surprising that she hadn't had plastic surgery. However, being beautiful and having a good personality didn't go hand in hand. She was very strong-willed and had a queenly temperament opposite to me and incompatible. Fortunately, she didn't try to involve herself directly with me, but that was only the case as long as my husband sided with me. My husband was entirely devoted to my sister-in-law, a fanatical admirer. It his abnormal attachment, which went beyond the bounds of normal sibling affection, became apparent soon after our marriage. At first, I thought they just had a close sibling relationship. It isn't unusual to hear about siblings, even after marriage, visiting and traveling together from colleagues and seniors at work. But it was rare for a brother and sister. My sister-in-law had married and started a family a little before my husband. As a housewife with time on her hands, she frequently called my husband over, just like when he was single. I tried to believe that my husband would gradually prioritize our family and refrained from nagging him. But even when I was pregnant and suffering from severe morning sickness, or when I needed him to accompany me to the hospital due to sudden illness, he would rush to his sister-in-law whenever called, like a puppy wagging its tail to its owner. Bites. I couldn't hold back and confronted him, asking why he couldn't put me first, especially since I was carrying his child. Right now, my sister is also pregnant and feeling vulnerable. I should prioritize her and her unborn child. He said this with such conviction that it was clear he meant it. I realized he valued blood relations more than his wife. I wondered if my husband married me because he had feelings for someone he couldn't marry. If that were the case, it would make sense. It would have been so much easier if this was a sham marriage. While faintly sensing his abnormal affection for his sister-in-law, I trusted my husband, who was cooperative in our efforts to have a child. I believed his love would turn to our daughter, his blood-related child. Even if my existence was secondary, as long as he showered our child with love, that was enough for me. Though with that resolve, I cherished the child in my womb and approached my due date. Initially, my husband was supposed to be present at the birth. But as our child was taking a while to arrive, he prioritized work over being there for the delivery. I wasn't without complaints, but at that time it was common to think that a man's presence during childbirth, where he couldn't do much, was unnecessary even if it meant sacrificing work. Believing it was better to conform to the expectations of his workplace. I faced difficult labor alone. Yet hearing my child's first cry brought an indescribable joy that overshadowed all worries. Our daughter was born larger and heavier than the average girl. As she grew up healthy and disease-free, I think my husband somewhat adored her. However, as she grew from a baby's face to a more defined look, he lost interest in our daughter. My sister-in-law's daughter, my niece, born in the same year, grew up to be a beautiful woman, the spitting image of my sister-in-law as a child. My husband began to devote his time to his niece and sister-in-law, paying no attention to our daughter. I took on the role of both mother and father. I raised my daughter with both the gentleness of a mother and the strictness of a father. At her elementary school sports day, I participated in events usually meant for fathers, doing my best for my daughter. Meanwhile, my husband increasingly acted for his niece, who had grown into a replica of my sister-in-law, both in looks and personality. Self-centered and haughty, she seemed to believe the world revolved around her. My brother-in-law, though a sincere man, had become a yes man who couldn't say anything to my sister-in-law or niece. He worked tirelessly outside, only to bring money home to his queen-like wife. But despite paying the mortgage, he seemed to have no place in his own home. My sister-in-law often bragged, "My husband is just an ATM, causing dismay in social gatherings." Gradually, my daughter came to understand and rely less on her father, treating him as if he didn't exist. But as she entered her teenage years, my husband, ignored by our daughter, began responding more eagerly to my sister-in-law's calls. He struggled to fulfill her unreasonable demands. Our family life was like a two-person relay with my daughter. When she started working part-time in high school, the agreement of splitting living expenses between my husband and me collapsed. If our daughter is working, she should bear a third of the expenses. My husband unilaterally decided rewriting the agreement. Thus, with 2/3 of his salary now at his disposal, he became more subservient to my sister-in-law. My daughter, not wanting to burden me, chose public schools for both high school and college, and paid for her expenses with her part-time job earnings. I gratefully accepted this and started saving for her future wedding. Thus my daughter grew up, graduated from college, and found a job at a respectable company. She continued to contribute part of her salary to our household, which I also saved for her wedding fund. When my daughter had been working for 3 years, she confided that she wanted to marry. She asked us to meet her prospective partner on a convenient day. My family, distorted by my husband's excessive sister complex, was different from a typical family. I was relieved and happy to know that my daughter had found someone to marry, as I had worried she might choose to remain single due to disappointment in married life. Unlike me, who was influenced by societal norms and customs, I was overjoyed that my daughter wanted to marry of her own free will. I earnestly hoped her future would be even happier than it is now. However, my husband was not just calm, but completely indifferent. He seemed to listen to our daughter's words about wanting to marry and meet the person, nodding along. But he stood up saying, "I can't promise to meet, but it's not like I won't meet. If I'm free on the day you decide, I'll meet." Says predictably, despite setting the meeting with my daughter's fiancé well in advance, my husband canceled on the morning of the meeting, called away by his niece. I asked him to delay his meeting with his niece, but he refused, saying he couldn't make his beloved niece wait. He told our daughter to choose any man she liked, as he wouldn't oppose. A text of the day to meet my daughter's fiancé's family was arranged with plenty of notice, and his parents were also supposed to attend. I told my husband about his fiancé's parents attending, and he acknowledged it. I made sure he couldn't claim he didn't know. Unable to stop my husband from leaving, I apologized to my daughter's fiancé and his parents for my husband's absence, without revealing the disgraceful truth that he knew and deliberately missed the meeting. I feared they would suspect our family had unspeakable issues. I was anxious that this could jeopardize my daughter's marriage. However, my daughter's fiancé and his parents were very understanding, saying every family has its secrets. Despite their generosity, I worried about the potential consequences and how this might adversely affect my daughter later. Then my daughter shared a truth with me, which might help calm my husband's abnormal behavior. I looked forward to the new relationships my daughter's marriage would bring. We left the wedding date and venue to the couple to decide. A few days after the meeting with my daughter's fiancé and his parents, she informed us of the wedding date and venue. She wanted to wear a certain dress available only on that date, which her fiancé agreed to. I relayed her wishes to my husband, asking him to keep that day free. I can't on that day. I'm going on a trip with my beloved. Just with my beloved niece and sister, that plan was made first, and my daughter's wedding was scheduled later. Besides, her wedding is none of my concern. It's her marriage, not mine. No matter how much I pleaded, he wouldn't listen. I'd never persisted this much with my husband since our marriage. Not even when he missed our daughter's birth, but he remained unyielding, showing no signs of changing his plans as the wedding day approached. So you really won't change your plans? You're persistent. I won't. I see, just don't regret it. But I won't. Changing plans with my niece would be more regrettable. Having heard him say this, I stopped bringing up the topic. As on the wedding day, my husband cheerfully left the house, dragging a large suitcase. I went to the wedding venue with my daughter, busy preparing in the bridal room. Then my brother-in-law appeared, usually a background figure but notably present today. He had forcefully brought my sister-in-law, niece, and my husband. He dragged my sister-in-law and husband by the arm, with my niece chasing after them, asking where they were taking her mother. My brother-in-law explained that he had planned to attend my daughter's wedding. My sister-in-law and niece, insisting they couldn't change their travel plans, were not going to attend. This morning, as my brother-in-law was preparing for the wedding, and my sister-in-law and niece were confirming their travel plans, my husband came to pick them up in a festive mood, learning that the father of the bride was ditching his daughter's wedding to go on a trip with his sister and niece. My brother-in-law exploded in anger. Just with a face as bad as usual subdued presence, just an ATM was replaced by an intense fury that surprised my sister-in-law, niece, and husband. He immediately canceled the trip. With no trip to go on, my sister-in-law, niece, and husband had no valid excuse, and my brother-in-law lectured them. He passionately argued from a father's perspective, asking how a father could miss his daughter's big day, urging him to be a proper father to his daughter leaving for marriage. He also scolded my sister-in-law for not correcting her brother's wayward behavior and her daughter's whims, venting his long-suppressed feelings. Ideally, it should have been me, not my brother-in-law, confronting my husband. Maybe I had resigned myself to the fact that he wouldn't listen. So, my brother-in-law forcibly brought them to the venue. I didn't argue or try to persuade. Or try to persuade my husband, just silently watched him leave. I know what my daughter thinks of her father, who prioritizes his niece over her. She didn't complain about his missing the initial meeting or the wedding day, perhaps thinking it a waste of time to expect anything from her father. I can't easily guess what she feels seeing her father and the others now. But if she says they're a nuisance, I dare to kick my husband and sister-in-law out of the wedding venue. I want to do something motherly for my daughter's new beginning. While waiting for my daughter's response, my niece and sister-in-law, upset about their trip being canceled, expressed their dissatisfaction. "This is outrageous. You're just an ATM. You have no right to talk back to me. I never thought of you as a father. Don't lecture me with that gloomy face. It's annoying. A plain and dull niece's wedding. What a waste of time." Be complaining about the cancellation fee. They didn't hold back their grievances. At this moment, my daughter's fiancé and his parents, noticing the commotion, came to the bride's room. They offered to call security if we were troubled, just as they arrived. My husband's face turned ashen. Why is the president of the company here? The fiancé, who my husband works for, is the future president and his father, the current president of the company. They were surprised to see the extent of the estrangement between my daughter and her father. The president, also my husband's boss, was both astonished and angry upon learning that my husband skipped his daughter's wedding for a trip with his niece. He demanded a satisfactory explanation from my husband, who had always prioritized his sister and niece over his daughter. My husband, cornered, turned to our daughter for help. "Help me out, prioritizing my niece isn't new. And you didn't stop me from skipping the ceremony. It's natural for me to find my niece, who adores me, cuter than a daughter who doesn't. But the truth is not that the daughter didn't adore her father, but rather the father didn't endear himself to his daughter. She clearly remembered calling him Papa when she first started speaking. There was a time she approached him to play, but he chose to prioritize his niece, leading her to grow distant. Now, instead of apologizing, he was blaming her. Such a selfish man. Excitation, a man who can say he did nothing wrong in front of his daughter doesn't deserve to be here. At this moment, I appreciated my brother-in-law's intervention. Ips, though, initially applauding his actions internally, I now felt it was unnecessary for someone able to show remorse. As my daughter remained silent, my husband reached for her wedding dress hem. She swiftly stepped back. "I stopped considering you as a father long ago. But still, half of your blood runs through me. It's revolting. Yet he cherishes me despite that. I thought maybe I could accept you playing father, but now it's impossible. Never show yourself before us again." My daughter made a clear declaration of disconnection. Just with her establishing her own family, there was no reason for me to continue enduring this situation. He was the worst kind of man, blaming my daughter even on her special day just to justify himself. I have something to say to you. I want a divorce. In hindsight, I could have raised my daughter without any difficulty on my salary alone. I shouldn't have worried about societal views on single parenting or the stigma associated with it. If my daughter and I were happy and unburdened, that was all that mattered. Perhaps I was unconsciously concerned about public opinion, just like my parents. The commotion spread to other guests, and someone called security. My husband's sister-in-law and niece were expelled from the wedding venue with some of his direct superiors and subordinates among the guests. The incident quickly spread throughout his company, tarnishing his reputation. Embarrassed, he couldn't assert himself at work anymore. After being told I wanted a divorce and losing his place at home, my husband turned to his niece, his only comfort, and stayed at my sister-in-law's house. However, they quickly turned their backs on him once he was no longer useful. But what use are you without money? I have no interest in a man without money. Disappointing? I thought you were better than this. A man without money is worthless. Just disappear. Hatation, my husband, who had always ridiculed my brother-in-law for being just an ATM, finally realized he was treated the same. He then desperately turned to me. You and our daughter are all that matter. I'll change, please reconsider the divorce. But my decision was firm. Why should I listen to him now when he never listened to me? I was already prepared to leave with a new place lined up. Brushing off my begging husband, I left the house and never looked back. As I left the property, I felt a sense of liberation from the long marriage. The divorce proceedings with my husband were surprisingly swift. Heartbroken, he wanted to settle everything quickly. It was convenient for me, but his impulsive decisions would later bring him trouble. I began a carefree life on my own, enjoying work without home responsibilities. The trouble awaiting my ex-husband was the mortgage. Officially set based on our dual incomes, it was now unmanageable on his salary alone. Coupled with his poor attitude towards subordinates and his disgraceful behavior at the wedding, he was relegated to a less important role in the company, leading to a significant salary reduction. Unable to afford the mortgage, he had to sell the house we lived in for over a quarter century and moved into a cheap old apartment. My sister-in-law, quickly cutting ties with her now poor brother, tried to appease her husband while waiting for things to cool down. But her husband, tired of her behavior, demanded a divorce. What? No way! I'm the one who decides on divorce, not you. She was upset and claimed to others that she initiated the divorce. And confident in her looks, she joined senior dating parties, expecting to quickly remarry a wealthy man. Though she attracted attention at the parties, her haughty attitude prevented any further developments. My niece, the same age as my daughter but with no job experience, was pushed into graduate school by my sister-in-law to avoid the stigma of failed job hunting. However, the divorce changed everything. Unable to afford tuition, my niece had to drop out and find a job. But her lack of experience made it difficult. Struggling financially, she resorted to unsavory work, which led to constant trouble due to her entitled attitude. Now she's selling off the luxury items she extorted from my ex-husband and brother-in-law to make ends meet. Being a housewife must be so relaxing. You just do household chores every day and probably don't get tired. You don't know how hard it is to earn money. Your everyday life seems so easy and enviable. I was tired of hearing this line time and time again. His attitude towards me, who supported our household as a full-time housewife, was unbelievable. He said the years of emotional abuse from him were becoming unbearable. I'm a 31-year-old full-time housewife. Even though we worked in different departments, we became close through a mutual friend at our company and got married when I was 29. But before marriage, we both had agreed to work and support our household. However, as our marriage progressed, my husband said, I can take on more work and support our household by myself. I want you to be a housewife and take care of the home. Our working hours differ, and we might not have quality time as a couple. You can do the chores at your own pace. I want you to wait for me at home. Considering that we hadn't been spending much quality time together, I accepted his proposal. I left my job and have been living as a full-time housewife for the past year. I used to be the type who couldn't assert herself and would often go along with others' suggestions. Back then, I genuinely believed my husband was making these proposals with our best interests at heart. Accepting his suggestion, I quit my job to focus on our home. Trusting someone is essential, but now I think that trust backfired on me. I often wonder if things would have been different if I had continued working. As being a housewife, many assume that I just relax and laze around at home, but it's not that easy. To doing laundry, cleaning every room, engaging with neighbors, and other social interactions take up a lot of time. If you try to do everything correctly, time flies by. But if I don't do these tasks, they won't get done. Just doing this 365 days a year, without a break, can be more mentally taxing than a regular job. Unlike employees who have weekends off, housewives don't get paid and don't have the concept of a weekend. So on weekends, when my husband is lounging around the house, I once asked him if he could clean the bathroom while I brought in the laundry. He looked irritated and said, "Why? Just like I work outside, housework is your job, right? Since you don't have the stress of an outside job, you should do all the household chores. I provide for us, so let me rest on my days off. I appreciate that you work outside and support our household. But that wasn't the agreement for our time as a couple. Since we live together, wouldn't it be okay if you helped out just a little bit? Stop complaining. Someone without an income shouldn't talk back to me. If you complain so much, maybe you should live alone. Do you think you could survive on your own without any income if we got divorced?" I was taken aback by his attitude. Whenever we argued, he would hint at divorcing as if he had full control over me. Although I was once employed, the thought of losing my husband's income in the event of a divorce now when I'm without a job was devastating. How would I live if he seriously proposed a divorce? The thought of work and home was terrifying for someone like me without a job. The most frightening thing was my husband's change. He used to be very affectionate, but as we continued our married life, he changed. I never thought he'd start making emotionally abusive remarks. Regretting marrying him became a frequent thought for me. Lately, when my husband returned home, he'd say a wife should greet her husband when he comes home. Who do you think provides for this lifestyle? My husband does bring money home, but I take care of all the household chores. We had agreed that both our roles were important, but over time, my husband started looking down on me as a stay-at-home wife. Initially, I thought he might be venting his frustrations from work, so I let him speak his mind. But eventually, he began to consistently belittle me. And so our days became like this. After his complaints, he'd casually drop his clothes on the floor and change into his sweatpants. I'd pick up after him, doing the laundry. This became the norm. This dinner looks quite plain. I've been working all day, and this is what I get to eat. I'd gotten used to such complaints. But as time passed, these emotionally abusive remarks started to bother me. It was always like this, and I was weary of it. Considering our not-so-abundant income and the potential need for future expenses if we had a child. I've been saving money while also using it for our daily needs. There was never much extra money at the end of the month. Despite this, I always tried to prepare balanced meals for my husband, and yet these complaints increase in his allowance. We were already stretched thin. Any more expenses would jeopardize our finances. The savings I had been gradually depleting were now almost gone. So, with the help of my friends, I found a part-time job I could do from home. I hadn't told my husband about it. This was because when I had earlier suggested to my husband, our finances are tighter than before. I was thinking of working a bit in between my household chores. What do you think? Are you trying to imply that I'm not earning enough? You probably just want money for yourself. You can't even manage the house properly. Don't think about going out to work. Even if he had agreed, anticipated he'd demand a larger allowance since I'd be earning. So, I decided to secretly work and save for my future. The work-from-home job was introduced to me through a friend. I could communicate with the company using just a computer from home. The main tasks involved were cost calculations and accounting for the company. I had worked before our marriage, so it wasn't particularly challenging. Managing the house on my own. But be able to contribute to society through this job felt good and was enjoyable. On a day when I was juggling household chores and the work-from-home job. I decided to take a short break after completing my tasks. Just what was supposed to be a 10-minute nap turned into a deep sleep until the evening. I had messed up. I was awakened by the sound of my husband returning home. Looking around, it was dark outside and night had fallen. I hadn't prepared dinner. I hadn't even cleaned the bathroom. As soon as our eyes met, my husband let out a long sigh and said, "And it must be nice being a full-time housewife. Not working and just taking a break. You're still sleeping when I get home. It really feels like you're just leeching off of me." That by now, I was used to his emotionally abusive remarks. But this time, I snapped and retorted, Just because you saw me napping, you assume I did nothing all day. My husband probably didn't expect me to talk back. He turned livid and ranted. You've got some nerve talking back. I'm the one supporting this household. I don't recall doing anything wrong to get this backlash. If you want to argue with me, then leave. If you insist, I'll leave. It's about time I reevaluated our relationship anyway. In the heat of the moment, our conversation had reached this point. I quickly gathered some essentials and decided to stay at a nearby business hotel. The stunned look on my husband's face when I said I was leaving. He probably never imagined I'd actually take action. The old me would have just been flustered without retorting when told to divorce or leave the house. But things were different now that I had my own income. Engaging with society had transformed the old me. Being able to assist someone else, receiving words of gratitude, and getting my work monitor really appreciated. Thought no matter how much housework I did, it was always taken for granted. Working from home had become my emotional support. Through my job, I regained my confidence and started voicing my opinions to my husband. Perhaps it might be good to have some distance for a while. With that thought, I decided to live in the hotel for some time. I had brought my laptop, so work wasn't an issue. I even had a surprising experience of uncovering financial misconduct in a company. After about a week, my husband contacted me, thinking that if he was willing to reconcile, we could restart our marital life. I answered the phone. However, my husband, with his typical attitude, said, "Have you reflected on your actions? How long will you neglect the house? This time, I'll forgive you, so be grateful." His unchanged attitude disappointed me. Without a word from me, he said, "You must have realized how hard it is for a full-time housewife to live on her own. Why don't you come back? I'll forgive you if you do now." His tone was condescending. When did my husband become this person? I was completely taken aback, but I had no intention of just taking it lying down. That's what the week was for. To be made. I'm sorry. I truly felt the hardships and will take care of the house properly from now on. As I humbled myself, my now appeased husband said, "As you should. You must realize how fortunate you are because of me." Though I disliked it, I decided to go home and continue with my preparations. The house, after being away for a week, was a mess. Clothes were strewn about, and the kitchen was filled with instant noodle trash. There was a mountain of what seemed to be laundry that had barely been done. I couldn't understand how it came to this. Perhaps he was feeling remorse over the phone, but was just too proud to admit it. Maybe he'd say he understood the hard work I did after coming home to see all the housework finished. I had a faint hope, but seeing the state of the house confirmed it. He likely reached out to me because he couldn't handle living on his own. He didn't want me back. He just wanted someone to clean up after him. I was once again astonished at my husband, but it was a good wake-up call. Hectors, I no longer felt guilty about the decisions I was about to make. For about 2 weeks, I worked both as a housewife and at my remote job, just like before. I cleaned the mess he made, didn't retaliate against his derogatory remarks, and kept my peace. Once all my preparations were complete, the day finally came. A day I neither prepared dinner nor a bath, simply waiting for him to return. Seeing the situation, he predictably got angry and began his slew of derogatory remarks. I listened quietly, head bowed to his rant. Perhaps emboldened by my silence, he became even more heated. And finally, he uttered the words I had been waiting for. You just say you're a full-time housewife, but you're just leeching off me. For a woman like you, with no income and can't even do her own job, probably couldn't survive if she divorced me. I thought you reflected last time, but maybe I should just file for divorce. Every time he mentions divorce, he wears a smug expression. He thinks it puts me in a position where I have no choice but to obey. But I lifted my downcast face, smiled, and responded, "You don't need to prepare the divorce papers. I already got them." I presented the divorce papers in front of him. My section was already filled out and stamped. All that's left is for you to sign. He was utterly stunned. He probably never imagined that I would be the one to bring up divorce. If we divorce, you're the one who's going to suffer. Don't worry, I'm perfectly fine. More importantly, haven't you noticed how different the house looks? For the first time, he really looked around the house. Where's the sofa? And aren't the bookshelf and appliances missing too? But since I brought those when we got married, it's only natural for me to take them with me if I leave. I had movers transfer everything to my new place already. What do you mean? I thought you were always joking about divorce. Besides, how are you going to live without a job? You've no savings or income. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. You really haven't noticed, have you? We work at the same company. I've been handling cost calculations and accounting as a remote worker. We've been emailing each other. Remember, the company that allowed me to work remotely was the same one I used to work for and where my husband currently works. The friend I mentioned was from that company. And since I'd maintained a good relationship with my former boss, I explained the situation and was hired. I did wonder what would happen if he found out, but there was no way he would take notice of a single accountant from a large company. So it wasn't an issue. There's one more thing I should tell you. I noticed your misuse of company expenses and reported it to our boss. The person responsible for the fraudulent claims I had discovered during my week living in a hotel was my husband. At unnecessary transportation costs and false lodging expenses. Since we lived in the same house, I would instantly know if he was lying. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was deceiving the company out of money. Unfortunately for him, his wife me caught on to it when he thought he was in the clear. I investigated his claims against his activities on the dates in question and gathered all the evidence of his fraudulent reporting. I could have chosen not to report him, but after receiving a call from him and seeing the state of our home upon my return, I made up my mind. This man was no longer the husband I once loved. I'd already reported his fraudulent claims to our superiors, and it was only a matter of time before he would be ousted from the company. His verbally abusive remarks and misuse of company funds make him a despicable person. "I can live without you. I've been managing the household while balancing everything else, so I won't have any problems moving forward. Goodbye." In my furniture, appliances, and everything else I brought into this house have already been moved to my new place. I would likely only see him when collecting the divorce papers, leaving my flabbergasted husband behind. I left. I later heard from a friend that he was indeed let go from the company. Misusing company funds is a significant black mark when seeking new employment, and it seems he's having a tough time finding another job. Anticipating that he wouldn't be able to pay rent, he returned to his parents' house. Although we met once to finalize the divorce, he was reluctant to proceed, but when I indicated that I would involve a lawyer, he begrudgingly agreed to finalize the divorce. I have since returned to full-time employment from being a remote contract worker. With the divorce, I'll be on my own for a while, but I've decided to focus on my job during that time, so it's not a problem. However, I've been thinking that maybe after some time, it might be nice to find a new relationship. The qualities I seek in a partner include not making verbally abusive remarks, being willing to work together, and being cooperative in household tasks.